So I want you to imagine, just for a second, standing at the very edge of your life.
Okay.
But you aren't standing there with dread or fear or regret. You're actually standing there with an open notebook.
A notebook, right.
Yeah, and have you ever considered that the way you view the eventual end of your life is like secretly dictating exactly how you're living it right now, today?
I mean, it is a massive shift in perspective when you really sit with that. We spend just so much of our daily energy completely avoiding the entire concept of death.
Right, we just push it away.
Exactly. And in doing that, we're completely missing the fact that our relationship with our own mortality is, well, it's the invisible architect of our everyday reality.
And exploring that architecture is basically our mission for this deep dive today.
Eh.
We are looking at a deeply fascinating source. It's a book called Keeper of Final Moments, Finding Life in Death by Andrea Lucia Tripodi and Asher Wright.
It's a really unique text.
It is, and even the cover art they provided in the source material sets this very specific tone. It shows a solitary figure walking toward a bright horizon under this just stunning, expansive, starry sky.
Right, and there's that quote right on the front.
Yeah, it's printed right on the cover. It asks, "We only hear that God knows us, but what about knowing God?"
Which I think perfectly encapsulates what Andrea is trying to do with this text. She's an end-of-life caregiver.
Also, she's been there.
Yeah, someone who has spent decades at the bedside of people in their absolute final hours. But to be clear, this is not a manual about dying.
Right.
It's really a philosophical and psychological and spiritual exploration of how to actually live. And I should add, as we dive into her framework, we are exploring her specific spiritual perspectives as a lens.
Right, a lens to view our own psychology.
Exactly. We're looking at our own daily habits. We aren't here to preach a specific dogma or, take sides. We're just here to examine this really unique framework for self-liberation that she lays out.
Yeah, and our goal today is to follow the roadmap that Andre provides. So we are going to explore how fear acts as this literal physical cage that prevents deep self-exploration.
A very real cage, yeah.
Right, and then we'll look at how we can practice what she calls the discipline of discernment to, break out of that cage.
Which is fascinating.
It really is, and we'll talk about how to transform passive belief into active knowing, and ultimately how taking radical self-responsibility can just completely liberate you today.
Right, because to understand how to live freely, you first have to understand the mechanics of the force that holds you back.
Right, fear.
Exactly. And what stands out from Andrea's decades of bedside observation is this very specific realization. She notes that people don't just fear the physical act of death.
Wait, really?
Yeah, I mean, she says that's almost secondary. What they are truly terrified of is the loss of their ego.
Oh, wow.
The sudden, completely irreversible loss of this constructed identity that they've spent decades building up.
So they're afraid of losing who they think they are.
Exactly. And she describes fear as a constrictive energy. And she actually takes it a step further, moving away from just abstract spirituality, and argues that this energy literally crystallizes in the human body.
Crystallizes. Like it becomes physical.
Right. If you hold on to fear, it doesn't just, float away like a cloud. It settles into your nervous system.
Oh, man.
It becomes chronic tension, blockages, and she even argues illness.
Mm-hmm.
It locks the body into a perpetual state of defense.
That makes a lot of sense, actually.
And the contrast she provides in the text to illustrate this is incredibly stark. She shares the story of one client who had a progressive disease. And this was a woman who had lived almost her entire life wrapped in unaddressed anxiety, constantly bracing for the next bad thing.
Just living in a state of panic.
Yeah. And when her final days came, that lifelong fear reached this terrifying crescendo. Andrea describes her literally sitting up in bed, her eyes wide with absolute horror, just screaming, "I'm dying, I'm dying."
God, that is chilling to read.
It is.
Because the fear wasn't just a reaction to the moment of death, right? It was like the tragic culmination of an entire life lived in fear. It was just the final expression of her daily habit.
Exactly. But then you contrast that with another client Andrea mentions. This was a woman who had just successfully finished 10 rounds of chemotherapy for cancer.
Okay, so she made it through.
Right. By all accounts, she was recovering. She was eating well. She was going for her daily walks.
Oh, that's so great.
She even started talking excitedly about hosting garage sales again and traveling, getting back to life. But when Andre finally said, "Okay, let's do it. Let's plan the trip," the woman completely shut down.
Wait, why?
She refused. She said she had to wait to see what her upcoming PET scan would say.
Oh, wow. So she was terrified of a test that hadn't even happened.
Right. And that is such a crucial example of how fear operates as a cage. This woman was physically capable in that moment. The cancer was retreating, but she was totally paralyzed by the fear of a future medical test.
So her fear of tomorrow was entirely dictating her today.
Yes. She literally canceled her own life because her ego just couldn't handle the vulnerability of uncertainty. She actually preferred the familiar misery of waiting for bad news over the risk of living.
That is wow. It makes me think of fear as like wearing a really tight suit of armor, you know?
Oh, I like that analogy.
Like you put it on initially because you want to protect yourself from a threat. It makes logical sense at first.
Yeah.
But you wear it so long and you hold so perfectly still out of fear that eventually the metal just rusts shut
Yeah.
and it stops protecting you and just starts suffocating you.
That is a brilliant illustration. It shows exactly how a defense mechanism becomes a prison when you just leave it unchecked.
I do have to push back a little here though on her behalf.
Sure.
Because it is very easy to sit in the studio and philosophize, right? Saying, don't be afraid, don't let fear dictate your life. But fear is a primal biological survival mechanism.
Oh, totally.
If a car swerves into your lane, fear is what makes you jerk the steering wheel to stay alive. How can Andrea possibly expect us to just turn off an instinct that is hardwired into our biology?
No, that is a completely valid point. And honestly, it's the exact wall most people hit when trying to apply this philosophy. How do you fight biology?
Right.
But Andrea's counter to that is fascinating. She argues that much of the chronic fear we carry isn't actually our own primal survival instinct. It's inherited.
Inherited, like genetically.
More like culturally. She references something called the morphogenetic field.
Oh, the collective memory concept.
Yes, exactly. It's the idea that we inherit cultural trauma, religious doctrines, historical anxieties. Just think about how a child watches their parents panic about money or, stress about health.
The kid just absorbs it.
The child absorbs that panic without even understanding the context, the fear of death, the fear of judgment. These are passed silently through culture, through offhand comments, and through language itself.
So they bypass our rational minds entirely.
Precisely. The goal Andrea sets isn't to magically flip a switch and turn off your biological reflex to dodge a swerving car. The goal is to stop feeding the inherited psychological fear that you've just mistaken for your own instinct.
Wow. Okay, so we are carrying around generations of everyone else's baggage and mistaking it for our own survival instinct.
Yes. Which brings up the obvious dilemma, right? If much of the fear in our heads isn't actually ours, how do we figure out what is ours?
Right, which introduces Andrea's concept of the discipline of discernment.
And her personal commitment to this is almost intimidating.
It really is. The book details this practice she started as a young girl, and she carried it all the way into her late teens.
She does it every single night.
Every single night, she would lie in bed and conduct this radical microscopic self-examination. She would review every single word she spoke that day, who she spoke to, what her body language was doing, and what her true intentions were.
I mean, think about the mechanics of doing that as a teenager.
Seriously, that sounds exhausting.
It's an age where most people are entirely consumed by what others think of them, right? Just absorbing external validation like a sponge.
Totally.
But by auditing her day so meticulously, she was untangling her genuine self from all that external conditioning. She was building this impenetrable sense of self-responsibility.
And she uses a really good metaphor for this, right?
Yeah.
The body as a house.
Yes. She says if you buy a house and you neglect it, you let the foundation crack, you let the walls rot, you cannot blame the outside world for the draft.
Right. It's your house.
We have to take absolute, unflinching responsibility for our own vessel.
But, she takes this concept of self-responsibility into some pretty controversial territory, specifically regarding external authorities.
She definitely does.
She openly challenges the way we have been conditioned to just blindly trust medical and religious institutions over our own internal symptoms. She argues that symptoms are God's language. Like, it is your body directly trying to communicate with you.
She points out that handing over our agency to outside systems creates this fatal disconnect from our own truth. We have been taught to trust a doctor's chart or, a diagnostic machine more than we trust the daily lived experience of our own physical form.
It's like owning a car, right? You drive your car every single day of your life.
Yeah.
You know exactly how the steering wheel pulls to the left, every hum, every weird vibration. Yet the second the engine makes a strange noise, you hand the keys over to a mechanic who has quite literally never driven your car, and you just blindly assume they know its history and its quirks better than you do.
That is the exact dynamic she is critiquing. Now, to be clear, she isn't saying that mechanics or doctors aren't profoundly useful or necessary for short-term stabilization or, acute crises. We're impartially reporting her view here, but she's not saying abandon modern medicine.
Right. She's not saying don't go to the hospital if you break your leg.
Exactly. The danger she highlights is when we surrender our authority entirely, treating outside experts as the ultimate, unquestionable source of truth about our own existence. When we do that, we breed fear, because we are constantly waiting for someone else to tell us if we are okay.
Right. We're waiting for the PET scan to tell us if we can have a garage sale.
Precisely.
Realistically, though, how does a normal person like you, me, or the listener start discerning their own truth without feeling totally overwhelmed? Because analyzing every single thought and word in a day like Andrea did sounds completely exhausting for someone with a full-time job and a family.
Oh, absolutely. But the text actually offers a very practical, grounded daily routine to start building this muscle of discernment without triggering overwhelm.
Okay, what is it?
It's a form of daily spring cleaning. In the morning, before you reach for your phone or turn on the news, you sit up, place a hand on your heart, and ask yourself one simple question. What is one thought I want to carry today that is truly mine?
Oh, I like that.
You wait for that thought to rise, and you consciously take it with you.
Just one thought. So you're establishing a baseline of intention.
Exactly. Then, at the end of the day, before bed, you do the reverse. You reflect and identify one thought you carried that day that didn't serve you, maybe an inherited fear or a resentment.
Right.
You write it down, you look at it, and you say out loud, I release this thought. It is no longer mine. You can tear the paper up or burn it. It is a daily, manageable practice of cleaning the house of your inner world.
Wow. That's actually really doable. But, once you've done that daily spring cleaning and you've started to isolate your own true thoughts from all the noise, you run into a new problem.
Which is?
Just believing in those thoughts isn't enough to sustain you when things get incredibly hard. Andrea argues that traditional belief is actually a trap. You have to step into what she calls active knowing.
Yeah, her distinction between belief and knowing is one of the most profound parts of the book. In her view, belief is merely a limiting beginner's stage.
A beginner stage.
Right. When people just believe a doctrine or a philosophy, they tend to become complacent. They stop exploring. Belief is static. It becomes this comfortable resting place where the ego can feel safe, righteous, and protected from doubt.
She gives a beautiful example about babies to illustrate this, which I loved.
Oh yeah, the baby analogy.
Babies aren't born believing their mother loves them. They don't possess, like, a complex doctrine or a philosophical framework of maternal affection.
No, they don't.
They just know it. They feel it through direct presence, through warmth, through touch. It's a cellular knowing that completely bypasses the intellectual construct of belief.
That's beautifully put.
Yeah.
And she illustrates this transition from passive belief to active knowing with a very vivid personal anecdote from 1997.
Right, the hailstorm.
Yes, she was driving from San Antonio to Dallas with her husband and another couple, and out of nowhere, they drove into this brutal, destructive hailstorm.
Oh, terrifying.
The tension in the car was immense. Visibility dropped to absolute zero. Cars were pulling over to the side of the highway, just trapped in the danger.
But instead of just sitting there hoping or passively believing they'd eventually be safe, she decided to do something radical. She decided to literally be faith.
Yes.
She saw a tunnel approaching ahead, and she stated aloud to everyone in the car that once they exited that tunnel, the hail would stop entirely until they reached their destination.
And the instant they exited the tunnel, it completely stopped.
That is wild.
She defines faith as an action taken without a single drop of doubt. It is the fundamental difference between hoping the universe acts favorably upon you and recognizing that your own consciousness is actively participating in the creation of your reality.
To put an analogy to it, belief is like sitting in a restaurant and just reading the menu.
Okay, yeah.
You can memorize the menu, you can argue with the people at the next table about whose menu is the best, but at the end of the day, you are still starving.
Right.
Faith, or active knowing, is actually eating the meal. Is digesting the food and absorbing the nutrients directly into your cells.
That captures it perfectly. If you stay in the realm of belief, you are never actually nourished by the experience of life.
But playing devil's advocate for a second, though.
Go for it.
Is it dangerous to equate our own internal knowing with divine authority? I mean, if someone walks around saying, my internal knowing is the ultimate truth and I can stop hailstorms, doesn't that just massively inflate the exact same ego she is warning us about.
That is a critical distinction to make, and Andrea addresses it head on. The answer is no, because true active knowing bypasses the ego entirely.
How so?
Well, the ego, as she describes it, lives in a world of pure duality. It only knows how to define itself by what it is not. It has to be right, which means someone else has to be wrong. It has to be good, which means something else has to be bad. The ego needs a fight to justify its existence.
Right. It thrives on opposition.
Yes, but true faith connects with what she calls the self, capital S-E-L-F. She uses that as an acronym for significant energy life force.
Significant energy life force.
Okay. This knowing doesn't reside in the egoic mind. It resides in your biology, in your cells. She argues that every single cell with respiration is literally in communion with the divine. It's not about asserting egoic power over the weather or over other people. It's about aligning with the natural, harmonious pulse of life itself.
So it's like a biological spirituality. The prayer isn't a desperate plea sent outward to the sky. It's a resonance generated within the body.
Exactly.
And to truly inhabit that state of active cellular faith, we have to face the ultimate, hardest lesson of this entire framework. We have to master the art of letting go.
Which brings us to the final and perhaps most liberating section of her philosophy. The text uses a very provocative phrase to introduce this. Every day is a dying day.
That concept stopped me in my tracks. Because we are so conditioned to think of death as this singular catastrophic event waiting for us at the very end of the timeline.
Right.
But she frames it as something we are doing constantly. We experience mini deaths all the time. Like the end of a long-term relationship is a death.
Yes, it is.
Shedding a career that defined your identity for 20 years is a death. Surviving a massive trauma and having to leave the old, naive version of yourself behind that is a death.
And in every single one of those mini deaths, the prolonged suffering doesn't actually come from the event itself. It comes from our resistance to it. Holding on is deeply rooted in the ego's absolute terror of losing its identity.
The ego fights it.
Right. The ego says, if I am not this relationship, if I'm not this specific job title, if I am not this grievance I've held on to for 10 years, then I cease to exist.
Letting go of those attachments, those expectations, is what she says leads to grace. And she shares a profoundly moving story to anchor this idea.
The ALS patient.
Yeah, she cared for an ALS patient, a man who was completely paralyzed, entirely dependent on a ventilator, and unable to speak. Now, for most people, losing the autonomy of the physical body is the ultimate terror. But as he was transitioning, as his body was shutting down, he didn't radiate fear. He communicated with the only thing he had left, which was his eyes. He looked at his wife and his son and then at Andrea, and he intentionally blinked his eyes to spell out, "Thank you, I love you," right before he passed incredibly peacefully.
Oh, wow. It is a staggering testament to the fact that love is an energy, not a finite physical resource. It doesn't die when the body shuts down or when a relationship ends. It flows in and out, much like a breath.
Like a breath, yeah.
Letting go of a person or an identity or a phase of your life doesn't mean you are losing the love associated with them. It means you are stepping out of the way to allow that energy to continue its natural flow.
It's like trying to hold your breath to save oxygen.
That's good.
You think that by locking it in your lungs, you are preserving your life.
Mm-hmm.
But the very act of holding on is what eventually suffocates you.
Yep.
The only way to survive, the only way to keep living, is to let the air flow out so you can take the next breath. And I want to ask you, the listener, directly right now. Think about a conflict, a pain, or an old identity you're holding on to right now. Are you really holding on to it because it serves you? Or are you holding on to it because your ego is terrified of who you would be without it?
That is the ultimate self-examination. And it synthesizes Andrea's core message beautifully, by examining our lives daily, by doing the hard work of discerning our own thoughts from inherited cultural fears, and by taking radical ownership of our daily actions. We do not have to wait for our literal deathbed to find peace or closure.
We can have it now.
We have the agency to liberate ourselves right now, in this very moment.
Let's trace the journey we just took, because it's a really powerful roadmap. We start by recognizing the constricting cage of fear, how it hijacks our nervous system and uses our anxiety about tomorrow to basically ruin our today. Then we use the daily discipline of discernment to sift through the noise, taking absolute responsibility for our own physical and mental house. We move past the static limitations of just reading the menu of belief, and we step into the active, cellular knowing of faith.
The self.
The self, exactly. And finally, we find true liberation by exhaling, stopping our resistance, and letting go, You are the active creator of your daily experience.
It is a deeply empowering framework for moving from chronic anxiety to absolute presence. And it completely challenges us to view our eventual physical transition not as a tragic defeat, but as the final conscious act of a life that was actually lived fully.
Which leaves us with one final lingering thought from the text to mull over. Think about the very beginning of human life.
Okay.
When a baby is born, their very first act in this world is a sharp gasp inward and inhale. They are pulling the atmosphere, pulling consciousness itself into a physical form. But as Andrea points out, the final breath a human takes, the moment before the heart stops, is always an exhale.
The breath literally carries the consciousness out.
So, what if the ultimate mystery of death isn't about everything going dark and silent, but about where that final consciousness-filled exhale goes once it is finally released back into the world?